A 77-year-old man walked 4 miles in November rain to carry a starving Rottweiler home in a horse blanket. The dog weighed 130 pounds. The man weighed 161. His truck had a flat tire, and he didn't wait for it to be fixed. 3 months later, on a Tuesday night in February, the temperature dropped to 19 degrees, and that man didn't come inside. Nobody knew, nobody called, the dog knew. His name was Hank, the man, not the dog. Hank Lindgren, 77, retired carpenter, lived alone on 11 acres outside Brainerd, Minnesota, in a farmhouse he'd built himself in 1981. His wife Maren had died 3 years ago. Stroke in the garden, quick, no warning. Married 51 years. Hank still set 2 coffee mugs on the counter every morning. He'd pour one, leave the other empty, and sit at the kitchen table looking at the tree line. And he didn't talk about it. He just did it. His granddaughter Claire, 26, lived in Duluth, 2 hours north. She drove down every other Sunday. The house was always clean, the stove fed, dinner ready. But she noticed things. Mail stacking up for days, the truck parked at the same angle for a week, the way he gripped the armrest with both hands when he stood. Last October she'd said, "Grandpa, what if we looked at some places closer to town?" Hank looked at her over his coffee and said, "I built this house, Claire Bear. I'm gonna die in it." He said it the way you say the sun comes up. The dog had been showing up at the edge of Hank's property for 2 weeks. A Rottweiler, black and rust, moving along the tree line at dusk. Hank first saw him from the kitchen window, a dark shape in the field, 100 yards out, all perfectly still, watching the house. The prints in the snow came back every night, the size of Hank's palm. Hank left a bowl of stew by the fence post on day 4. By morning, the bowl was clean and flipped upside down. On day 14, Hank drove to the co-op and saw the dog in a drainage ditch along County Road, 18, 4 miles from the farmhouse, in the rain. 130 pounds on a frame built for 160. Ribs like fingers pressing through a blanket. Coat dull and patchy, the rust markings faded to old pennies. A half-healed gash on his right shoulder, crusted with mud. He was shaking. Not cold shaking, but the kind that comes from being cold so long your body forgets what warm is. His eyes were dark brown, almost black, with the flat stillness of something that had stopped expecting anything. Hank wrapped the dog in a horse blanket from the truck bed. Old wool, green plaid, the one Maren used to throw over the fence rail to dry. His front tire was soft. The co-op was closing early. He looked at the tire, looked at the dog, and started walking. 130 pounds of wet fur and bone against his chest. The rain was 38 degrees, the kind that presses down on you like a hand. His back seized at mile 1. His hands went numb at mile 2. Both times he stopped to shift the weight. The dog pressed his head against Hank's neck, breathing in shallow pulls, the only warm thing on his body. 4 miles, an hour and 40 minutes. Hank walked through his front door at 3:15 p.m., set the dog on the kitchen floor next to the wood stove, and sat in his chair. He couldn't unlace his boots for 20 minutes. He named the dog Odin. Maren had kept a list on the fridge, names for dogs they never got. And Odin was at the top, in her handwriting, held by a bait shop magnet from Ely. Hank crossed it off with a pencil. First mark anyone had made on that list in 3 years. The vet said Odin was about 4, malnourished. The shoulder wound was a coyote bite. No chip, no collar, no record in Crow Wing County. A ghost. By week 4, he was 155 pounds and filled the house the way weather fills a valley. He knocked over the boot rack, ate a work glove, blocked the kitchen doorway with his body until Hank said, "Move," and waited 5 seconds for the grunting and shuffling to finish. But Odin had a quality Hank hadn't expected. He was quiet, not trained quiet, deep quiet. He didn't bark at deer in the yard. He didn't bark at the plow truck. He lay on the kitchen floor next to the stove and watched Hank the way a man watches a campfire, steady, patient, like there was nowhere else to look. Every morning at 5:15, when Hank fed the stove, Odin stood up and stood beside him, close, shoulder against Hank's thigh, like he was making sure Hank didn't fall into the fire or disappear into the dark or stop being there. Every evening at 6, Hank sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, but decaf after 5, Maren's rule, which he still followed. And Odin lay across the top step with his chin hanging over the edge, watching the tree line, the same tree line he used to watch from the other side. Claire came Sunday, week 3. She saw Odin on the porch and didn't get out of her car for a full minute. Inside, she said, "Grandpa, you walked 4 miles in the rain, carrying a 130-pound dog. Mom, you're 77 with a bad knee." Hank poured her coffee. "I'm not alone anymore." Claire looked at Odin by the stove. She looked at her grandfather, standing straighter than she'd seen in months. She didn't say anything else. February, the coldest stretch in 14 years. Tuesday night, the temperature dropped to 19 degrees by 8 p.m. and kept falling. Hank went out to the woodshed at 7:30 to bring in the last load for the night. The woodshed was 80 feet from the back door, a path he'd walked 10,000 times, gravel in summer, packed snow in winter. He was carrying an armload of split oak when his boot hit a patch of ice under the new snow. His feet went out. The wood went everywhere. Hank landed on his left side, hard, on the frozen ground. He felt his hip before he heard it. A deep, wet crack. That like a branch breaking inside a mattress. He tried to stand. His left leg wouldn't hold. He tried to crawl. The pain whited out his vision. He was 80 feet from the back door, lying on frozen ground in 16-degree air, wearing a flannel shirt and no coat, because the woodshed was only 80 feet away, and he'd done this 10,000 times. His phone was on the kitchen counter. Odin was at the back door in seconds. He didn't bark. He pushed through the storm door. It wasn't latched. Hank never latched it. And ran to Hank. He sniffed his face, sniffed his hip, circled him once. Then he lay down, not beside Hank, on Hank. He pressed his 155-pound body against Hank's torso, his back against Hank's chest, his massive head tucked under Hank's chin. He covered him like a blanket made of heartbeat and breath. Then Hank could feel the heat immediately. Odin's body temperature was 101.5 degrees, the way all dogs run, and against the frozen ground, it felt like a furnace door opening. Hank lay there. He couldn't move. He couldn't shout. The nearest neighbor was a quarter-mile away and the wind was blowing south. The stars were out. The cold was the kind that makes your ears ring. Hank wrapped one arm around Odin's chest and held on. Odin didn't move, not once. His breathing was slow and steady against Hank's ribs. His tail was flat against Hank's leg, still. 40 minutes, an hour. The cold pulled him down the way deep water does. Not violent, just heavy, quiet, patient. Hank knew what hypothermia felt like. First the shaking stops, then the thinking slows. Then you want to sleep, and the wanting feels reasonable. Odin pressed harder against his chest. His heart was beating against Hank's arm. Steady, heavy, fast enough to feel through fur and flannel and cold. Hank held on. At 9:47 p.m., Claire called. No answer. Again at 9:52. Again at 9:58. By 10:03, she was in her car. 2 hours to Brainerd. She drove it in an hour 37. She pulled into the driveway at 11:40 p.m. The house lights were on. The back door was open. She ran around the side of the house and found them. Hank on the ground, conscious, one arm around Odin, his lips blue, his eyes open. Odin hadn't moved. 4 hours and 10 minutes on the frozen ground, and the dog hadn't moved once. The paramedics said Hank's core temperature was 91.4 degrees. Hypothermia starts at 95. Below 90, organs shut down. Another hour, the EMT told Claire. As he said, and we wouldn't be having this conversation. The dog kept him above the line. 155 pounds of body heat for 4 hours. That's what did it. Claire was standing in the kitchen doorway, coat still on, keys still in her hand, her face holding everything at once. Fear, relief, anger, love, with nowhere for any of it to go. Hank spent 6 days in the hospital, fractured hip, mild hypothermia, back on the farm by the following Tuesday. Claire drove him home. She didn't mention Duluth or places closer to town. She walked into the house and said, "I'm moving into the spare room for the winter." Hank looked at her. "Claire Bear, not negotiable, Grandpa." Today Odin is 5, 158 pounds. Hank is 78. His hip healed with a pin and a limp he refuses to call a limp. Every morning at 5:15, he feeds the stove. Odin stands beside him, shoulder against his thigh. Every evening at 6, they sit on the porch, decaf for Hank, the tree line for Odin. Claire moved back to Duluth in April, but she comes every Sunday now instead of every other. Last month, she brought a man named Ben, who shook Hank's hand and then immediately got knocked sideways by Odin's head. "He likes you," Hank said. "He does that to people he likes." Ben looked uncertain. Claire was laughing. The kind of laughing Hank hadn't heard from her since she was a kid. Hank still sets 2 mugs on the counter every morning. He pours one. The other he fills with water and sets on the floor next to the stove, where Odin drinks from it at exactly 5:22, while Hank watches the tree line and drinks his coffee. The mug is blue. It has a chip on the handle that nobody ever fixed.